Welcome to the last lecture of this semester, Education that is Multicultural. Basically a summary of the different experiences that we've been having this semester and pulling all the concepts together and really helping you find a place for them. Any loose ends that may have been thrown out there this semester, this presentation is about bringing it all together and giving you a clearer picture. Now, before I get started, I saw a talk this week that was based on 3 principles, okay? He said, write consciously, read critically, tell your truth. And this is based on a TED Talk. Okay? Now, I want to start this lecture from this platform. Because, firstly, before I get onto this, I want you to know that these TED Talks are really valuable for you to begin to gain perspectives on education from around the world. And education that is multicultural, the world is multicultural. So understanding from different experts that give their perspective on education can really benefit you and apply immensely to your classroom. So I'm going to apply something I learned from the TED Talk to this classroom and speak about where you will go from here. Underpinning multicultural education is about you engaging in discussions in which you have written consciously. You've thought about what you are writing down. Some of you may not have thought about it as much. But writing consciously is about beginning to transform yourself, beginning to use discourse and words that you may not necessarily have used before. You will notice that if you go back to your first discussions, you will use words that only later on you will fully have understood. Let me say that again. If you go back to your discussions in the beginning and you compare them to the ones you are doing now, you will notice that a shift has occurred in many of you. And you're beginning to write more and more consciously about the way you do things. But writing consciously is only half as important as reading critically. You will notice during the presentations that there are points in which I've stopped and I've actually begun to challenge the authors. You will notice that I begin to challenge those because I want you to read critically and I want you to take these lectures in critically and think about them and how they apply. Nothing you read in your career will totally sit well with you. You need to be able to challenge them. You need to be able to work with them. And you need to be critical of them. Finally, you need to tell your truth. Multicultural education is about finding your space in the broader pluralistic society that we are engaged in. So multicultural education is not only out there, but it's also within you. And this class has really been about helping you develop these skills, to being able to write consciously using the discourse of multicultural education. I'm able to sit down with you and talk to you about things like pluralism, assimilation, nationalism, ethnocentrism. These are words that you may not have been exposed to before the way you think about the world. There will come a time in which something you've read about will occur in real life and the penny will drop. That is when you will realize that you have read critically. Remember to tell your truth. Remember to think about your truth. Remember to think about your blueprint. Remember we spoke about a blueprint. To think about how all of these concepts have begun to fit together, almost like puzzle pieces. Each of these has represented a puzzle piece that is beginning to fit together into this broader puzzle. Now, beginning with that, let's have a look at what was multicultural education. Let's tie this whole piece together. If we remember from lecture number 1, multicultural education is a concept that acknowledges the importance of diversity in the lives of students, families, and builds on it to promote equality and social justice education. Remember, diversity is strength. Okay? And multicultural education is not about what we call rhetoric of multiculturalism. In other words, multiculturalism on the surface, but it's about deep understanding. It's about deep change. to the status quo. Of dominance. Multicultural education is about helping you as a teacher shift the status quo. Because the status quo is perhaps why you got into teaching in the first place. What have we learned in this class? Let me break it down. I'm starting off with the takeaways first, up front. Place students at the center of learning. Students are the reason why we get into teaching. We don't get into teaching for the money. We don't get into teaching for the hours. We certainly don't get into teaching for the stress and anxiety that it can cause. We get into teaching because we are passionate and we care about young people and about their futures, right? So remember to always begin with that in mind. Place them at the center of learning. Establish a safe classroom climate. You are the law and order in your classroom. You are responsible for the classroom climate in your classroom. Believe that all students can learn. Picture each one of those students in your classroom as one of your children and think about how you would meet them where they are. If students aren't learning the way you're teaching them, you need to change the way you teach so that they can learn. Simple as that. Acknowledge and build on students' life histories and experiences through culturally responsive teaching. This is a new term. I know it's our last lecture, but I want you to Google this term, culturally responsive teaching. It's teaching that uses a student's culture. Remember, culture is a blueprint that encompasses age, it encompasses ethnicity, it encompasses race, it encompasses gender, it encompasses religion, it encompasses all these factors that we've been speaking about and uses it to teach the student. It analyzes oppression and power, relationships in schools and society. When we spoke about gender and you watched the video about the fairer sex, and we spoke about male privilege, and we spoke about race, and we could have spoken about white privilege, and we could have spoken about male privilege and other forms of privilege, okay? It's because we're beginning to unpack the way in which oppression occurs. And multicultural education, true multicultural education, is about challenging those forms of oppression. All right. We have modeled justice and equality in the classroom with students, families, and communities. There's no doubt that each of you have shown a commitment to justice in education. Many of you have said that how you will use some of these principles in your classrooms. And that is really, you know how to use multicultural education. This class has just been about giving you the tools and the language to talk about those in real time. Okay, so this is a bit more. I've touched on these. But make sure that students know you care and that you show pride in their work. They can feel it. Remember how we spoke about 90% of the communication between you and a student is non-verbal communication. Okay? They will know whether you care and whether you are actually proud of them or not. Okay? Here, I've spoken about the hidden and overt curriculum. Remember, emotions and attitudes are felt. All right? Joint and productive activities, believing all students can learn. Remember, some students learn together. Some students work better collaboratively than they do by themselves. Okay? Challenge them through activities. Set them things that they can do, but set them things that will stretch them. Set them things that will learn, that will help them learn about life and how life really works. Okay? Reflect. Very important. We're going to come back to this term. Reflect on the way they are learned input. Reflection is critical. Find common ground and be brave. Remember, we learned that most teachers will not touch on multicultural issues because they are too scared to. They will not touch on issues of race. They will not touch on issues of gender because they are too afraid to delve into that. So remember to be brave. In order to really impact not only students' lives but the society in which they are, you have to be brave. You have to learn to be reflective and you have to learn to be compassionate. Most importantly, you have to learn to be the bigger person when it comes to children. Children will test you. Children will humiliate you. Children will be angry with you. Children will say terrible things to you. Remember, your job is to be compassionate and to be, quote-unquote, the bigger person with them. Okay? Model justice. Develop critical thinking. Challenge them. Use some of the questions that we've discussed over the semester. I've used these questions with third graders. I've used these questions with second and first graders. Critical thinking does not necessarily have to be a very complex thing that we only do at university level. Young people are thinking about the death of their goldfish and the moral implications and the ethical implications of that. Young people have a mind. We just need to develop their thinking, okay? Know yourself. Get to know yourself more. You've engaged in a family origins project and an autobiography project. You've found out your family history and where they come from. Very important to understanding yourself and your biases too. And remember, last but not least, reflect, reflect, reflect. Think about yourself. Reflect on why things happen, okay? Now, we're going back to the 7 principles of multicultural education. I want you to think about how these have applied and how they've been used. Remember, we need to use culturally sensitive materials, culturally sensitive and culturally relevant, okay? We need to use the learning styles of students. Remember, we need to begin where they are. Begin where students are, okay? And that way I'm able to begin where students are, all right? I use oral and non-verbal communication. 90% of what you are saying comes through your body language. 90% of it. Remember that. Okay. It has to be integrated throughout the curriculum. It's nice to have days where you bring international food, but that's not good enough. You have to integrate multicultural education in different ways. Okay, you have to make sure that the disparities between men and women, the disparities between racial groups are addressed in your classroom. All right. It must deal with the social and historical realities of American society. I hope as you've sort of dealt with the literature, you've realized that things aren't as rosy as they seem, okay? And that you as a teacher are slap bang in the middle of all of that. All right. So it has to deal with that. It has to talk about that. It has to think about ways and strategies to deal with those things. All right. And it should incorporate from the local community. Where we don't know, we can refer and draw on other expertise to help us teach and learn. Finally, my message to you, this was my classroom in South Africa. My message to you is make your life matter. Okay? Make sure that when you step into the classroom, that who you are comes through. And that each day you learn how to take students, wonderful young people with huge potential, to where they need to be. These people will teach you more than you will teach them. But unless you're using the tools of multicultural education, you will lose out on those great learning opportunities. I wish you the best, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future. Please feel free to contact me or email me with any questions. Thank you. Take care.